Everybody, welcome to Leon's Chainsaw Parts and Repair. I think we can all recognize a Homelite Super XL. Can't tell if it's fuel residue or oil that's on this thing, but UPS, I guess, jostled it around enough to get something to come out. Anyhow, this is Jason's Super XL. He's down south of me in Susanville. So, thanks for agreeing to work on my saw. I got this saw from my dad. We used to use it to cut firewood together back in the 80s. Pretty cool. The problems I'm having are it boils the fuel after cleaning out the airspace around the fuel tank. If I shut it off for a few minutes after cutting for a while, it is hard to restart sometimes. When the saw is warmed up and I refuel, it won't run much above idle without bogging and losing RPMs, as with no load on it. If I give it a couple minutes, then just very little bit of throttle, it will slowly pick up RPMs without bogging. Once I get through this and the RPMs up, it runs like normal. The manual oiler leaks around the plunger. Okay. Well, that manual oiler leak is the least of my concerns right now. We're going to deal with everything else first. It's a lot of plate. Looks like it needs an air filter covering that too. A lot of places that this could be going on, or the problem could be. Okay, so we've got a bit of a leak. An air filter, somebody's sealed this with, attempted to use silicone, which unfortunately just makes a mess. I don't know why this thing's leaking around. This is just that aftermarket filter. You can see it's definitely leaking sawdust around here, so we'll deal with that. I want to get this thing apart a little bit and do some inspections, because no matter what, we got to tear into it. Now, boiling fuel is typically that plugged airspace that Jason was talking about. Now, I can immediately see that this thing has been cleaned more than once. So this saw has received better care than a great many. Now, there is some buildup up here between the cylinder and the throttle handle, and that's actually a pretty good buildup of junk. So we're gonna clean that out too. But what I'm curious about is if we need to get this thing down to a point where we can do a leak down test, because if it isn't sawdust buildup that's impeding airflow, about the only other two things it could be would be carburation, and in this case it would just be a restriction in the carb or a bad gasket or a diaphragm that's not allowing it to get enough fuel, running lean essentially. Or, again, an air leak. And that air leak would be in the form of almost certainly a crankshaft seal. Not 100%, but almost certainly. The only reason I put a little caveat in there is I have seen exactly one of these saws with a leaky cylinder gasket. I know it's more common in later model saws. I do not find it common in these things at all. But I can't rule it out. So, we need to get this apart and see what the hell we're dealing with. The hard to restart, I'm tempted to say that we're going to find some issues in the carburetor. You know, it's possible there's more than one issue, which can be the ultimate frustration, trying to chase down more than one thing at once. Okay. Get get this puller tool off the flywheel and I'll give you guys a shot down through there. It looks pretty good, but I still have reasons to believe there is going to be some blockage on the other side. I'll show you why. See this? There is some stuff down in here. Now, I don't know. It may not be enough to be causing the boiling fuel issue. But again, when fuel boils in one of these things, it's either heat transfer or it's it's always going to be heat transfer, but it's either a lack of airflow around the engine or the engine running lean and getting way, way hot. And I suppose this screw is filled with sap and sawdust. I suppose we ought to pull the muffler too and just see what it looks like inside. See what the piston looks like on that side. Make sure we don't have some other issue going on. But getting some stuff out of the way never hurts. Because I'm still fairly convinced this thing's going to get a fairly extensive teardown, if nothing else to be seen. Well, this saw definitely has not been abused. Excuse me, like some that I've seen. Alright. I want to clean this air box out thoroughly. We're just going to get the carburetor off out of the way. Okay, now that carb is loose. See that? Those screws are too loose. There could have been an air leak up here too. I don't know if the gasket shrunk or what, but those didn't have nearly enough torque on them. Baby. When the reed valve gasket or seal or whatever you want to call it starts to harden on these things just a little bit around the screws, real pain in the butt. I'll show you what I do to deal with that. So that's loose. There we go. Get our high-low out of the way. All the reeds look good. That's a good sign. Now see, those screws ought to slide right out of there, and they're not. So just take one of your screws, force it through. You're literally going to break that hardened material away from the screw surface so that it slides in and out. Give it a couple times until it goes in and out without being a pain in the ass. Now I'm just going to put this back together. No, I'm not. Look at how much garbage, even on the choke plate. Now the good news is, if you ever wondered, did it get into the engine, where you really have to be concerned is if it's on the throttle plate behind it. That's when you need to be concerned. Out here, that's not a good sign, but better than the alternatives. Alright. I said it, we might as well do it. Let's see what the piston looks like. Carbon in the port here, quite a bit of carbon in the port there, but piston looks good. So while I've got the muffler off, I'm going to carefully chip that carbon out of there as much as possible. That is not what you want in there. But she's got pretty good compression. Pretty good compression overall. So that's good. Alright, we're going to keep looking for blockages. We're going to take the throttle handle off and just assume that we're pulling that fuel tank for a good cleaning behind it. And you absolutely have to get this throttle handle out of the way to do that. Now the one screw is nice and loose, this other one being a pain in the ass. But there it goes. We're having a long flat screwdriver like this with a round shank so you don't tear everything up. Really comes in handy. Because there's really not enough room in there to get a ratchet and a short stubby socket. You'd have to have a super low profile ratchet. Maybe a ratcheting 5/16, but I don't know. I've heard horror stories about those ratcheting mechanisms breaking pretty quickly when you put much pressure on them. And you can round those screws off awful quick. Alright, we need to get oil line disconnected here. Both inside and out, but start with the outside. And then once that's loose, you can, see that's already broken loose. And you just want to open this up just enough that you can get your wrench in there and get it loosened. And then use your thumb or finger if you can. That way you don't distort that line that much. Fuel hose. Okay. Now you're going to start to see what I mean. See, this is all the stuff that's built up. And these marks, those are the cylinder fin marks right there. So there was not much airflow going this way out. And you can see the buildup of crap around here, and it's starting to coat the cylinder fins. That acts as an insulator, that grease, it does. So that could be contributing to some of the heat issues. But now we're to where we are. We're going to go ahead and pull those 3 tank screws, and that should tell us the story. Okay, so let's see what this looks like. Oh yeah, alright, so here we go. There was no airflow movement past the tank. It could get to right about there, and that's it. See all this crap? So, how do you prevent this? Other than regular cleanings, if you're cutting the right kind of wood, you maybe don't. It may be that every 5 years you've got to pull it apart to clean this out. Not necessarily. I mean, what I tend to do with my Super XL style saws is I will actually blow it from this side and work the crevice from the front. You can take a garden hose and blow it that way. But if you've got a points ignition, you're going to make a mess and have to clean those points and dry them out. Now, air from here will sort of work, unless you've got really sappy wood or a bad duckbill valve that's allowing fuel to come down here and mix with the sawdust, because that's when you create the grease. Some of this appears to be that, and some of this is, see, that's just a chunk of wood. This has cut some pretty dusty stuff, given that it's from Susanville. For you guys on the East Coast, or you haven't been around that area, there's a lot of ponderosa. That's probably the primary wood out on that side of the Sierra. And Jason, if you see this video, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's probably ponderosa, and I know from experience that stuff, when it dies, creates almost a sawdust-like powder when you cut it after it's been dead for about a year. That's the way it kind of starts to break down. So Guessing that's what it's all about. But anyway, I'm going to start getting all this crap cleaned up. And this may be one that I'm going to want to pressure test, but I'm not sure at what point I'm going to do it. I think I'm going to want to clean this and put it back together some first. And then go from there, because yeah, it'll be far easier for me to use the carburetor to actually block this port. So yeah, like I say, I'm going to spend some time cleaning this up and we'll come back. Okay, we are ready to pressure test this crankcase. So I have thick rubber block offs. This is 1/8 inch rubber. Behind the carb, between the carb and the reed valve, and behind the muffler. And of course I'm pumping up through the spark plug hole. So that's it, that's all I've got to block. Now, the fact that I use those rubber plates behind the factory parts, it's not just pure laziness of not wanting to cut metal plates. That is part of it, there's no question. But in a case like this, I'm now able to also test if there's a leak somewhere. I'm going to find out if it's that seal at the reed valve, if it's that gasket, or if it's something else. Alright, I'm going to go up to 10. I hear a leak. I don't know where it's at yet. I think my muffler block off might be failing me here. I am not 100% certain. I can hear it. I can hear something and she's bleeding off, but I say I can hear it. I'll be damned if I can tell you where it's coming from. Oh. I can tell you one thing that's happening that shouldn't be. That crankshaft seal is leaking. Bigger than bug crap. So we'll start by eliminating that problem. I may have to get this ignition module off and out of the way. Oh, there we go. There she comes. Yep, that was definitely a leaker. Good news is I don't see any sawdust behind it. So that's a plus. But any leak is not a good leak. So, let's just see how much we slow the bleed off down with replacing this seal. It has to help. That we know. Is trying to drive crooked, and I don't like that. fan of that at all. Even with the right tool, it doesn't always go as planned. There it goes. Looks pretty straight in the bore. There we go. All right. That's one bad spot. God, I'd like to know where that is. But I don't know. Alright, I need to get the clutch off, which means I need to put the flywheel back on so that I can hold it. I guess we ought to check the new, just to be sure. Yep, that looks good. The new seal shouldn't cause problems. But if I had $1 for every time that you came across something that shouldn't happen but somehow magically did, know what I mean? Okay. I'm not going to be shocked if I have to take that muffler off and check that block off, although that's tight. I've got a hard time believing that it could be leaking that much. Not again, stranger things. Okay. And this is why I had to put that flywheel back on. I want to use my tool here to hold it. I'm loosening that clutch. Homelite manuals are pretty adamant about not using air tools on this, and with the number of pins that I have magically sheared, I can't say that they are wrong. It's so tempting to grab the rattle gun and just go at it. The battery powered one I've gotten away with. I've never broken anything with it, but there's a first time for everything, and I don't want to have today be that first. So I'm going to try doing it the quote-unquote right way. I'm going to use some brain leverage. Okay, there we go. That one wasn't actually that bad. I've really had to lay on these. The clutch is in good shape. At least eliminate that from the equation. Alright, I'm going to try and cheat. Leave that oil pump in place and pump this thing back up. So I don't need to pull that oil pump. I won't. And true to form, I don't. Okay. Not a problem there. So I'm going to put some stuff back together. Rather than burning camera time, I'm going to put this back together, pull this muffler off, and see if I've got a can body that I can put on that's easier to see around, and see if I can figure out why it's leaking and where. Okay, that's what it was. I didn't have that muffler tight enough, or the flange just wasn't strong enough. So using this can muffler, I've been able to get it down where I've just got a tiny little bubble I can see popping right there, and I may have ogged the one screw hole out a little bit. But you see, she's holding rock steady. This is the way it should be. Now for the final test, we're going to put it under vacuum. This will test those garter springs on the crank seals. Somewhere between 10 and 11. Rock steady. And the reason the saw moved, because you actually suck the piston up and down on the bore, and I've still got that tool on there. Alright. So I'm to the point where we'll come back later. I'm going to get this put back together. I need to grease the clutch bearing, and when I put that back together, clean the muffler out, put it back on, go through the carb, just get everything reassembled, and we'll come back for a test run and some conclusions. Okay, she's back together. We're ready for a test run. I didn't find anything else, to be perfectly honest. Alright, so the low was only open just a hair over one turn. So I'm going to reset that to close to a turn and a half. And the high is open one. We know that crankshaft seal was leaking. And there's a darker spot on that side, but this thing was definitely running a tad on the lean side. It's not enough to have done damage, thankfully, but it definitely was running lean. And at some point, something has caused a pretty good carbon buildup in the muffler port there. I chipped all that crap out, got it looking pretty good. The only other thing I found, I was going to leave the fuel hose, but this is the section that was between the carb and the tank. When I opened up the fuel tank, that's what I saw. And the filter wasn't strong enough to pull it down. So it was intermittently going in and out of the fuel, I think. Now this stuff doesn't have a manufacturer on it. It just says oil 1305-011. I mean, I don't know what it is. It's still flexible, but it turned into a curly Q. What the hell good is that? So this has Tygon in it now. I haven't run this at all since I put it together, so this will be a complete cold start. Let's see what she does. Starter's doing. The hell? That was strange. Can't tell if she's flooded or not. God damn this starter. Ah! No good deed goes unpunished. This is why I don't normally sow the first cold start, because stupid stuff like this happens. Okay, let's get this test run going. Fix the starter spring, I'll talk more about that in a minute, and discovered a bad out-of-the-box spark plug. But I want you to listen to how low this is idling, and see how far this is backed off. Further evidence that she was running lean. Okay. Oh, man. She's just a tiny, tiny bit rich still on the high side. But I did that on purpose. That way I could run it pegged like that to try and warm it up a little bit. That last good sustained rev when I had my hand down here under the muffler. I don't know if the video caught that, but I was about that far below the exhaust outlet. It finally got uncomfortable enough that I wanted to move my hand about the point I let up the rev. So she's not running hot. When I hold my hand up here, with it running at peg, I can feel air movement. It's not like a fan.